Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Renewable Feedstock Pretreatment, the Key to Refinery Flexibility, brought to you by W.R. Grace & Company in partnership with Biodiesel Magazine. I'm your moderator, Anna Simmet. Before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but may ask a question at any time by typing it into the question box. Questions will be addressed during our live Q&A following the presentations, and any questions not answered during the webinar will be followed up with by our speakers. A recording of the webinar will be available at biodieselmagazine.com. Now, a little bit about our presenters. Today, we have the pleasure of having with us Chelsea Grimes, a Global Strategic Marketing Manager at W.R. Grace & Company. She's responsible for the vision and execution of strategic projects in the biofuels market. She has spent the past 9 years in the specialty chemicals industry working on removing various contaminants from oils while mitigating the environmental impacts of the refining process. Chelsea earned a Bachelor of Science in Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering from the University of Maryland, College Park. Also presenting today, we have Natalia Krupkin, Technical Service Manager for Biofuel Applications at W.R. Grace & Company, where she provides technical solutions and support for key biofuels accounts. She joined Grace in 1988 in its corporate research center before moving to the Materials Technology Division in 2000. Natalia earned her Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from the University in Ukraine in 1988, Master of Science in Chemical Engineering from Johns Hopkins University in 1995, and MBA from Loyola University in 2006. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to our speakers. Chelsea and Natalia, welcome and take it away.
Thanks, Anna, for the introduction, and thank you to everyone who has joined online with us today. As you can see on the slide, we have quite the packed agenda for you all. First, I'll provide an overview of the biofuels market and process technologies. Then I'll pass it over to Natalia, who will take you through feedstock characteristics, more details on the pretreatment process, and various adsorbent technologies that are available today. We'll then wrap it up with an example of Grace's optimization modeling capabilities and some time for Q&A at the end. But first, we'd like to start off with a poll question. Let me see. So yeah, we like to start off with this poll question just to learn a little bit more about you guys and what your expectations are for today's webinar. So are you, just here to learn more about pretreatment options? Are you here to learn just about the renewable diesel market in general? Perhaps you have a refinery issue that you're trying to solve and you've joined with us to, maybe brainstorm and see if this is something that you might be able to apply to your own operations. Or perhaps you're completely new to this industry and, just here to learn a little bit more. So I'll go ahead. I believe a couple more seconds to get your answers in. Okay. So from the results on the screen, it looks like the majority of you, well, first of all, there's a pretty good spread. Looks like we have some veterans with us, not too many newbies to the industry, but if you are new, welcome. Looks like the majority of you are here to learn just more about pretreatment in general and the renewable fuels industry. So I believe with the agenda we have, you should definitely, we should definitely be able to help you out. Okay. So yeah, before diving right into the presentation, I just want to start quickly with a brief introduction to Grace. So Grace today is a global supplier. Oops, sorry, got to go back one. Grace today is a global supplier of specialty materials and catalysts. However, much has really changed since we were first founded 170 years ago. Fun fact, Grace once owned cruise ships, restaurants, and even a national bank. However, today we are a private chemical company within Standard Industries, serving customers in over 100 countries. So Grace as a whole is broken down really into these four main business units. Our specialty catalyst business offers a portfolio of polyolefin catalysts and technologies, while our refining technologies unit is a global supplier of fluid cracking catalysts and additives for petrochemical fuels. On the flip side, Grace's JV with Chevron, known as Advanced Refining Technologies or ART, provides hydroprocessing catalysts to produce renewable fuels such as renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuel. Last, but certainly not least, our materials technology business, which myself and Natalia represent here today, is a global leader in specialty silica materials that go into a variety of end-use applications. This can be anything from pharmaceuticals to cosmetics to coatings and even the production of biofuels. So now let's dive deeper into the renewable fuels market. A global goal to net zero was established back in 2015 under the Paris Agreement. Today, the Earth's surface temperature is much higher than pre-industrial levels, but limiting it is needed if we really want to avoid severe climate impacts. To achieve this, greenhouse gas emissions must peak next year in 2025 and decline almost one half by 2030. Of all the greenhouse gases, whether it's fluorinated gases, methane, nitrous oxide, or carbon dioxide makes up the largest share, contributing to Earth's rising temperature. Today, the transportation sector makes up about 1/3 of emissions worldwide. So finding a way to really reduce CO2 emissions in this sector could have a substantial impact on mitigating climate change. One way to reduce or to really eliminate CO2 emissions is to completely adopt alternative technologies that do not rely on carbon, such as, renewable hydrogen, renewable electricity, whatever. While the other way is to really renew carbon that's previously been released into the atmosphere. This is where biofuels like bioethanol, biodiesel, renewable diesel, and sustainable aviation fuel come into play, especially in segments where, electrification is not a viable solution. In aviation, as you can see from the chart on the right, sustainable aviation fuels may be the only option to replace fossil fuels in long distance planes, since hydrogen and battery options are still in early stages of development. Here, up to 88% of carbon emissions can be avoided by implementing SAF. So out of 39 billion liters of renewable diesel and SAF today, over 3/4 come from North America and Europe. Looking out to 2028, we expect South America will encounter significant growth. However, the majority of these sustainable fuels are still expected to come from those regions where strong policies and incentives are already in place. In the United States, key drivers for sustainable fuels include the Inflation Reduction Act, state-level low-carbon fuel standards, and the federal RFS blending obligations. The United States also launched the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Grand Challenge in 2021, which targets 11 billion liters of new SAF production by 2030. In Europe, the Refuel EU aviation legislation, which is a key part of EU's Fit for 55 package that sets SAF blending obligations, it's really forecasted to increase the SAF blending share by 4% in 2028 and further to 6% in 2030. So policy implementation will definitely play a key role in materializing this growth of sustainable fuels. However, feedstock diversification and availability is not something we can really ignore. So having the flexibility to use whatever feedstocks you can really get your hands on is not only necessary to continuously feed your refineries, but also to create fuels with the lowest carbon intensity. So taking a step back, I know there's really a lot going on this slide, so I don't want you guys to feel overwhelmed at all, but this is really, just a testament to how complex the pathways can be when producing biofuels. So as you can see, the primary pathway to produce biodiesel, aka FAME, is trans-esterification with methanol to create fatty acid methyl esters. Because this reaction results in a fuel that contains some oxygen and is not chemically identical to petrol diesel, there are, however, blending thresholds that cannot be exceeded with existing engines on the road today. The three most well-known pathways to produce renewable diesel and SAF include alcohol to jet, Fischer-Tropsch, and the hydroprocessing of esters and fatty acids, also known as HEFA. While the first two pathways are still in the demonstration phase and require significant production costs, the HEFA pathway is already commercially proven at scales needed to help decarbonize the transportation sector. Renewable diesel is a drop-in solution that can replace 100% of petrol diesel for road transportation. However, unfortunately, aviation fuel specifications require a fraction of aromatics, so only roughly 50% of traditional aviation fuel can be replaced with SAF. The gray box you see on this slide encompasses technologies available at scale today. Most of these feedstocks are lipid-based sources, but whether the lipid is a waste byproduct or a freshly grown crop, a pretreatment followed by some kind of catalytic reaction is how the world today achieves the majority of biofuel production. So with renewable diesel and SAF leading the majority of biofuel growth, let's zoom in a little bit on how these fuels are produced. Starting out with your feedstock source, whether it's animal fat, used cooking oil, or a new crop, maybe it's soybean, canola, rapeseed, maybe a cover crop, who knows. The oil must first be extracted and then sent to a pretreatment process to remove phosphorus, metals, and other contaminants that can affect downstream performance. The feed is then hydrotreated with catalysts to remove oxygen, nitrogen, and sulfur in order to meet diesel specifications. The resulting hydrocarbons will be linear and then must be reacted with an isomerization catalyst to really increase the hydrocarbon branches and improve the cloud point of the fuel. If the final product is intended to be SAF, the fuel must also be cracked to decrease the hydrocarbon chain length into the C8 to C12 range. Distillation at the end of the process really helps separate and purify the different cuts of fuel, and this can be anything from naphtha to SAF or even renewable diesel. So Grace, along with our joint venture ART, we offer proven technologies available at scale today and over 45 years of experience really in the processing steps located within this green box. The purpose of this webinar today is to understand more about pretreatment. However, please feel free to reach out to us, if you have any questions about hydrotreating and isomerization catalysts, and we can definitely help you get connected to the right people inside Grace. All right, so let's zoom in more on that pretreatment box. What does that really look like? So because phosphorus and metals found in biofeedstocks are at much higher levels than traditional crude oil, removing these contaminants is essential to ensure multiple feedstocks from a variety of sources can be used without really causing any issues downstream. For instance, phosphorus is known to polymerize at high temperatures and foul heat exchangers, resulting in premature pressure spikes and forcing operations to shut down. Metals, depending on the actual element, can form complexes, precipitate out of the feedstock, poison and block active sites on the catalyst, again, forcing operations to shut down and replace the catalyst. Not only is this time consuming, but extremely expensive considering, these catalysts are supposed to last at least 2 years or more. Pretreatment is more complicated than just one step though. It actually involves a series of processes displayed here at the top of the screen. First, feedstocks are blended together, depending on whatever is available at the moment. Like I said before, this can be used cooking oil, animal fat, category 3 grease, whatever you can really get your hands on. here the feedstocks can really be creative. Sometimes the blends can be 2 or 3 different feedstock sources. However, sometimes we've seen, blends with 8 or more different sources. Depending on where the feedstock comes from, there could be plastics or bone fragments. It's pretty unknown. So whatever really needs to be removed, there's typically a series of strainers installed to remove those macro substances. Next, the feedstock blend is conditioned with a mild acid to help chelate out metals and phospholipids. Most of the time, this is citric acid that's used. Following the acid conditioning, treating with caustic and water washing is optional, but this really just depends on how contaminated the feedstock is and what your pretreatment technology provider recommends. After water washing, as much as 75% of phosphorus and metals are removed, but this is still not quite enough to protect downstream refining. This is why the adsorption step is so important. So impurity adsorption is where an adsorbent material is added to really remove the remaining phosphorus and metals down to trace levels. Most of the time, this is 3 ppm for phosphorus and 7 ppm for metals. Hydroprocessing technology providers set feedstock specifications on these impurities, so it's essential to choose the right adsorbent that can handle even the worst contamination levels. Otherwise, you will completely void their guarantee on performance. Again, so why is pretreatment so important? Because essentially less impurities equals longer catalyst activity, less maintenance, less refinery turnarounds, and ultimately more productivity. So one more slide before I hand it off to Natalia. Although the pretreatment process can seem pretty straightforward, that doesn't mean it comes without its challenges. So most of these challenges can be categorized into these 4 main categories: feedstock sourcing, feedstock flexibility, tackling the actual contaminants themselves, and waste management. There's a limited amount of lipid-based feedstock available today, and getting your hands on the amount you need to feed your refinery consistently can be exhausting. So having a refining process that can help mitigate feedstock losses and keep more in your process is a challenge pretreatment with the right materials can address. In order to have a robust, bulletproof process, refiners need to stay flexible and be able to use whatever feedstock they can get. A pretreatment process that is compatible with a spectrum of feedstocks and blends would be very beneficial. Say you have plenty of sources, but the quality of the feedstock varies day to day. Depending on what the oil and fat is used for the first time around, contaminant levels when you actually get it, can swing drastically. So a pretreatment process that has a high efficiency for removing phosphorus and metals without leaching any impurities back into the feedstock is really required. And last but not least, the issue of waste. Considering the majority of pretreatment technologies have been adopted from the edible oil industry, it's really no surprise that, bleaching earth adsorbents are used to start up these pretreatment units. However, because phosphorus and metal contaminants usually start out much higher in renewable feedstocks, and color is not a specification here as it is in edible oil, an adsorbent that is more efficient at removing the impurities that matter most could lead to lower adsorbent dosages and thus a smaller environmental footprint. So with that, I would like to hand it off to my colleague, Natalia, to kind of walk us through some feedstock characteristics.
Thank you, Chelsea, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for joining our webinar. We really hope you found it useful. As we discussed today, the subject of renewable diesel, one of the first critical elements to consider is the feedstock. Building on what Chelsea just said, contaminants that are present in crude oil vary widely depending on feedstock type and quality. and that's why it can be challenging for renewable diesel industry. Typical contaminants found in renewable diesel feedstock are shown on this slide. The biggest challenge is that levels of impurities for metals are anywhere between 5 and 300 parts of million, and for phosphorus anywhere between 5 and 250 parts per million, depending on the feedstock. You can see from this table here that an additional challenge comes from animal fat-based feedstock that are much lower in quality. Clearly, one of the major difficulties for this industry is to meet low metal and phosphorus specifications that are set by catalyst manufacturers, like our colleagues in advanced renewable technology hydroprocessing. Drilling deeper into impurities profiles, you will see that composition of impurities are very complex. Phosphorus largely comes from organic phospholipids, and the metals are salts of free fatty acids. These compounds are largely insoluble in aqueous phase and converted into soluble compounds via acid addition, resulting in hydration of these insoluble compounds. Table on the right summarizes the levels of hydration of various phosphorus compounds that, as you can see, can vary anywhere from 0.5 to 100. Each structure present in the feedstock not only has different rates of hydration, but adsorption as well. All this is particularly challenging and hence requires proper process design, which would enable removal of such contaminants. To summarize key points, contaminants removal is a key to refinery flexibility. As previously emphasized, mitigation of contaminants will result in a number of benefits for refinery, such as improved catalyst life, feedstock flexibility, reduced falling of the catalyst, and most importantly, process efficiency and safety. Once the feedstock is selected, the next step is adsorption process and selection of adsorbents. Let's dive deeper in the process of contaminants removal or pretreatment step. This chart highlights GRACE's recommended process conditions for pretreatment with silica adsorbents specifically designed for this process. Typically, pretreatment process has few steps prior to the adsorption, as Chelsea described before, starting with crude feedstock degumming, followed by optional water wash, and then it goes through adsorption step, when phosphorus and metals impurities are being removed. Before adsorption step, the following is very important. If the moisture is higher than 0.5%, vacuum dryer step will be necessary to remove an additional moisture. Further, we suggest the contact time in a slurry tank to be approximately 15 to 30 minutes at temperature around 70 degrees Celsius or 160 degrees Fahrenheit to allow for a proper adsorption of impurities. The process after adsorption step is similar to the conventional edible oil refining process, and that involves drying and filtration steps. Selecting the right type of adsorbent is crucial, as it directly influences the efficiency of the process. Let's look together at different adsorbent types that are currently used in the renewable process. This slide summarizes 3 types of adsorbents. Those adsorbents can complement each other when used in pretreatment process. The first one, synthetic amorphous silica, later referred as SAS, has a tremendous capacity to absorb polar contaminants such as phospholipids and group 1 and 2 metals, as it has been used by edible oil industry for the past 30 plus years. Synthetic amorphous silica hydrogel product, but design contained about 60% water hidden in a porous structure, And it is this functional water which gives silica hydrogel its advantage in this process. In contrast to the hydrogeled silica, the activated bleaching earth has low moisture content, lower level of impurity, and being mined naturally may contain traces of crystalline silica. It is widely used today to remove color bodies in edible oil process. However, for renewable diesel and SAF production, color is not a specification required by the catalyst technology licensors, so there is no need for bleaching in pretreatment units. Diatomaceous earth has negligible affinity to polar molecules, and it is typically used as a filtering aid. Building on what we just discussed, let's explore how, by leveraging physical and chemical properties of synthetic amorphous silica hydrogel, we can impact performance and outcome of the pretreatment process. As mentioned earlier, the functional moisture property of SAS hydrogel facilitates migration of polar contaminants onto the silica internal surface. The high moisture also helps reduce dusting during silica handling. SAS hydrogel's relatively low solids content and low dosage requirements translates to far less spent filter cake solids and lower associated oil losses as compared to bleaching earth and diatomaceous earth alone. And lastly, synthetic amorphous silica hydrogel granular particle shape gives it excellent filtration properties on the pre-coated filter when compared to bleaching earth's flat platelet-shaped particles. Moving on to chemical properties of synthetic amorphous silica hydrogel, we can see that high purity of synthetic silica makes it essentially inert in oil when compared to bleaching earth and diatomaceous earth. The levels of pro-oxidant metals is extremely low, especially alumina, sodium, iron, and calcium, as you clearly can see from table and the graph. Those metals can potentially leak out back to the oil in the process and create potential poison to the hydrotreating catalyst. As mentioned in the previous slides, synthetic amorphous silica hydrogel, like Grace's tricyl silica, has many advantages that are important, if not critical, for the renewable diesel process. As I indicated before, it starts with process safety. Tricyl is amorphous adsorbent with no detectable carcinogen crystalline silica and low dust potential during handling. Tricyl's specially designed structure allows to achieve the highest capacity to absorb polar contaminants and prolong catalyst life. As you can see, tricyl silica history goes back to mid-80s, when Grace sold commercial silica into edible oil refining, and it continues until today with new inventions that include commercial demonstration of modified caustic refining with tricyl silica to reduce water washing in 1993, followed by triclear process purification technology developed by W.R. Grace for refining of edible oil. And finally, tricyl silica entering biodiesel and renewable diesel markets in 2015. And last but not least, in 2018, our scientists developed next generation of tricyl silica to remove glycidyl esters contaminants formed in edible oil during high temperature refining. As a strategic focus for Grace, we continue our legacy in oils and fat markets with new innovations and our customer support every day. In the next section, I will be sharing with the audience adsorption data comparing tricyl synthetic amorphous silica hydrogel with other adsorbent technologies like activated bleaching earth in different feedstocks. Building on what we discussed and keeping in mind that feedstocks can change and the contaminants levels vary so much that you cannot basically compute directly the efficiency of adsorbent just by looking at percent reduction. Therefore, we use model adsorption. Let's briefly review adsorption fundamentals. Isotherm is a fundamental theory in adsorption. The Langmuir-Hinchelwood model works extremely well for evaluating capacity. Adsorption capacity is modeled versus concentration in treated oil. You can clearly see from the shape of the curve, graph on the right, that capacity increases with level of contaminants in the oil. Then there is a sharp drop in capacity at low contaminants level. And as expected, at high contaminants level, you will get diminishing return. Using this model allows us to estimate the efficiency of an adsorbent and amount needed to meet set specifications for any inlet impurity concentration. With that said, let's review now a few real-life examples of adsorbent behavior in various feedstocks. This slide shows a summary of results for a specific blend of tallow and soybean oil at two different levels of impurity. X-axis represents adsorbent concentration and Y-axis is a total metal concentration, which includes phosphorus in this case. The graph on the left shows total metals plus phosphorus impurity as a function of adsorbent dosage. Table on the right summarizes the data at two different initial impurity levels and again indicates the adsorbent dosage required to reach specifications, which in this particular case were a total 7 ppm. As you can see from the data, the dosage needed to achieve target specification is 3 times lower for gray trisyl silica compared to the activated bleaching earth. And similar data, as you can see later, exist for customer-specific blends. Moving on to the next few slides, those are examples of our library of performance for various adsorbents in different feedstocks. Previously, I showed you tallow and soybean blend. Now you can see comparison of performance in the used cooking oil. Once again, trisyl silica performance is compared to the bleaching earth. Looking at metals plus phosphorus concentration versus adsorbent dosage on the left, and evaluating capacity of adsorbent versus concentration on the right. It is clear from those charts that with bleaching earth, even at levels as high as 6%, total impurities cannot be reduced below 10 ppm, which was a spec in this particular case. Here we evaluate silica behavior in another feedstock, distillers corn oil, looking at phosphorus and metal separately. Once again, you can see that silica trisyl outperforms bleaching earth at much lower dosages. And similar examples exist for a number of different feedstocks and their blends. So far we have learned what the adsorption process looks like and how contaminants can be mitigated by using silica adsorbent. Let's discuss now what approach we take as a company to help customers achieve their specific goals in the process of feedstock purification. The first step is to develop an extensive database for a matrix of various feedstocks and adsorbents by evaluating materials' performance as far as adsorption and filtration. This will allow us to help customers optimize pretreatment step for their specific feedstock blend. At the same time, it is very important to work with engineering houses closely in optimizing the process itself. Up to date, we have already collected a significant library of data for a matrix of various feedstocks, which allowed us to create an economic value model that shows the benefits of using trisyl silica hydrogel adsorbent in customer-specific process. Let me hand off next slide to Chelsea so she can explain economic model in greater details. While I'm handing it off to Chelsea, we will have a short poll on the screen. Thank you. So just to highlight what's the important for you, what's the most important? Is it the productivity or safety or sustainability?
Don't worry, guys. This is going to be a trick question. I know all three can be important, but if you had to choose just one, what would it be? Wow. Okay. So it looks like over 60% of you guys value productivity, followed by sustainability and then safety. Good news for you all online. We're going to talk about all three coming up. Just a second. Okay. Let's dive into the economic model Natalia just referenced. So based on our library of data generated internally and in collaboration with some customers, Grace has been able to construct this economic model that not only helps predict the adsorbent dosages required, but also the cost savings potential when switching from one adsorbent technology to the other. With a few simple inputs, like you see here on the slide, whether it's the refinery's design, the type of pretreatment unit you have, the feedstock you use, the local economics that is associated with your region, Grace's model illustrates to renewable fuel producers how to really optimize their entire refining process from feedstock to fuel. So let's take a case study example where, this refinery just wanted to change the adsorbent they utilized in their pretreatment unit. In this case, they wanted to compare the use of just bleaching earth to a mixture of trisil and bleaching earth. Here, the feedstock incoming and final specification remain the same. 20 ppm of phosphorus and 30 ppm metals coming in, but they need to achieve 3 ppm of phosphorus and 7 ppm of metals as set by their catalyst technology provider. Based on these requirements, our model predicts that they will need about 2.5% bleaching earth if just using one adsorbent, or a mixture of 0.5% trisil and 0.2% bleaching earth just to really help improve the filtration and pre-coat the filter. When comparing both cases side by side, this single change allows this refinery to save in adsorbent cost and use around 62%, waste reduction and disposal savings around 82%, and a 1% yield increase in fuel production without needing to secure additional feedstock upfront. Altogether, this totals up to a 79% pretreatment OPEX savings when incorporating Grace's trisil silica adsorbent. Overall, the value delivered to our customers is really supported by these three main pillars: productivity, safety, and sustainability. So I'm glad everybody online cares about all three. By incorporating trisil silica adsorbents into your pretreatment unit, you can expect lower oil losses and thus more feedstock retained in your process. Also, because trisil is a more efficient adsorbent, it can help achieve even lower levels of phosphorus and metals than other adsorbents. This leads to longer catalyst cycles and less refinery turnarounds. Because trisil is a synthetic amorphous material and there are no risks of crystalline silica exposure and no leachable metals that can go back into the feedstock, cause oxidative reactions, and lead to filter cake self-ignition. Additionally, because trisil requires lower dosages and contains less solids than bleaching earth, the amount of waste can be reduced as much as 85%. The hydrogel composition and high purity of trisil gives it better equilibrium kinetics when adsorbing impurities. allowing refineries to utilize a broader spectrum of feedstocks, generate lower carbon intensity fuels, and ultimately stay flexible. As with anything, all of this value can be demonstrated with a properly planned trial. So how do we work with our customers? When evaluating new feedstocks and preparing for trials, collaboration is really the key to get the job done. The first thing we do is really get to know the customer and learn more about their refinery setup and what typical feedstocks they use. We then collect samples and analyze the contaminant levels via our internal ICP method. We then run a series of trials with Tristil in the lab at different dosages and measure the treated feedstock again to determine the Tristil dosage ranges that they can go use at a larger term trial. Our technical customer service team will then put together a proposal and will travel to the refinery to support the trial in person. Based on the results, our team helps determine the right Tristil dosage for them to meet their needs, and then our team helps calculate a true cost savings with the model I previously shared. Once the customer implements Tristil, our support really doesn't stop there. Our technical team provides continuous support in the pretreatment units and offers reoccurring training to refinery personnel on an as-needed basis. In situations where troubleshooting in the refinery is outside of the pretreatment unit, Grace can also bring in technical support and resources from our other business units like ART, as Grace is really the only adsorbent and catalyst supplier that understands the entire renewable diesel and SAF production process from feedstock to fuel. So with that, I would like to wrap up today's webinar with the following key takeaways. In order to have a flexible and reliable production of renewable fuels, a robust and efficient feedstock pretreatment is necessary. Synthetic amorphous silica adsorbents, such as Grace's Tristil silica, are more efficient at removing phosphorus and metal-based species that matter most to the catalyst performance downstream. And with Grace's Tristil silica, you can expect improved productivity, safety, and sustainability at your refineries, all at a total reduced cost of ownership. Please feel free to scan the QR code on the screen to learn more about Grace's renewable fuel solutions and take advantage of the 45 plus years of experience we have serving this industry. If you have any questions that come to your mind after this webinar, here you can find mine and Natalia's contact information. Feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn or shoot us a private email, whatever you prefer. Thank you all again today for joining, and we really hope to hear from you soon.
All right. Thank you very much, Chelsea and Natalia, for those outstanding presentations. We will now begin our Q&A session. Attendees may still submit a question anytime by typing them into the question box, and I will go in the order they were received. The first question we got in was, are you just focusing on pretreatment of HEFA feedstocks?
Yeah, so I know this is really a hot topic as we try to develop other technologies like alcohol to jet and Fischer-Tropsch. There's definitely, I think the one slide that was very overwhelming showed all the different feedstocks available. But in a nutshell, the answer is no. HEFA is definitely, those lipid-based feedstocks where Tristil has proven performance for 30 plus years. With the model, we can really feel confident in knowing the Tristil performance in those kind of feedstocks, but we are evaluating other sources. Another part of our materials technology unit is molecular sieves for ethanol dehydration, and this can also help support the alcohol to jet pathway as well. Getting into more of the plastic circularity conversation, those are happening internally. But if Tristil works in them, I think that's still to be determined. If you have any feedstocks available that you would like us to test, please let us know. We're very curious to work with you guys on that.
Thank you,
Yes.
Chelsea.
just to add what Chelsea
Mhm.
said, we're constantly evaluating different feedstocks. We're getting some different synthetic oils, and so feel free to send us a sample and we can tell you.
Very good. The next question is hemp being considered for a source of feedstock?
Is hemp being considered?
Mhm.
Natalia, I don't know. In the lab, have we gotten samples of hemp oil? I don't know.
I don't think so.
I don't
But
think so, but yeah, again, if you have a sample, please feel free to reach out to us. We're curious to know. I would say, if the matrix is a non-polar lipid-based matrix, then most likely it will work because Trisol has so much water. It's really good at removing those polar and ionic contaminants from a non-polar environment. So if that's, I mean, honestly, I don't know too much about hemp oil, but
I think it's gaining interest right now to use hemp as a feedstock, and we would be happy. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't work, but
mhm.
of course, it's not something commonly used right now.
All right. The next question is, does Grace also have hydro treating processes for biomass and plastic materials?
Yeah, so I'll say, this is falling outside of our business unit, but definitely our FCC business and our art business. These are feedstocks and processes that they look at constantly. So I'm pretty confident that they are. And yeah, if that's more of interest to you, we can definitely get you connected to, some of our team in those divisions. But yeah, I think biomass and plastic circularity is definitely a, a good focus across all Grace's businesses at the moment.
All right. The next question, just for a little context, I believe it was asked during Natalia's slides on absorption capacity. And the question is, are the vegetable oils from cellulosic sources?
The ones that I had on my slides, I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think they are cellulosic,
No.
the source. But again, if you have a sample of something you're curious to test, I know there's a lot of different things coming into the pretreatment world, a lot of different feedstocks to evaluate. So if you do have a type on your hand, please, like I said, get in contact with us. We can definitely send you samples as well. And yeah.
We're more focused on what people use currently as a feedstock, but we're always looking at different things constantly.
All right. The next question is, what equipment is best for utilizing SAS contact with the feedstock? Is this used as a fixed bed or a pressure leaf style?
Are you talking about filtration or I'm not sure.
I think just like the equipment process in general, right? Like,
Think slurry tank. So you need the dosing system to unload silica, and it comes in similar to any other adsorbent in bags and super sacks and railroad and trucks, and you basically introduce it in a slurry tank, and then it follows the same. There is not much different, except the solids will be lower, the dosage will be lower, but it's the same filtration, the same leaf filters. So it's not much different as far as what equipment is needed.
All right. The next question is, what about the use of acid oil or high FFA oils? Is there an FFA limit for the use of adsorbent?
yeah, so I'll say there's really no limit when it comes to trisil. One thing we have looked at in the past is that, you know, sometimes higher FFA content can limit other kind of adsorbents from doing the job. However, we don't really see any kind of FFA effect on the trisil performance. And I know, especially when we talk about renewable diesel and SAF, keeping the free fatty acids in the feedstock, you know, that's productivity right there. That's increased yield. So we definitely don't want an adsorbent that will remove them. We want to keep them in there. But in terms of, you know, does it hinder the polar and ionic contaminant removal? Short answer is no. And we believe, you know, as the world starts looking at more contaminated feedstocks or even acid oils, you know, the FFA content, the phosphorus content, the metals, it's all going to get worse and worse and worse. So that's why, you know, we really believe in this product, that it can handle feedstocks of all ranges of quality sources, whatever, especially for the contaminants that, you know, the hydroprocessing catalyst downstream just can't handle.
All right. The next question is, has Grace modeled its technologies into Aspen software, and can that file be shared to integrate into our PDF and post-manufacturing data collection for credits and regulatory review?
Wow. Aspen software.
I don't think so.
Yeah, no, not at the moment. Right now, this is a, you know, an economic model tool in Excel format that we use just to really help our customers one-on-one improve their process. It's nothing that is in Aspen, or honestly, I'm not too familiar with Aspen,
Well,
but
it's
I think it's
software
way more
that people use.
sophisticated.
Yeah, it's a
But
software, but I don't think we're at that stage.
yeah, no, we've looked at so many different feedstocks, and we have so much data on adsorption capacity, even at both extremes of contamination, you know, going from 50 to 100 ppm all the way down to the 1, even below 1. Then you start talking about detection limits of the ICP, and that's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, I think based on the feedstocks that are used today, and like I said, we work a lot one-on-one with our customers. So if it's something one of our customers is using, good chances are we've tested it, or even, you know, just market samples in general, right? Um, some of these more developmental feedstocks, I think, you know, they're definitely worth exploring. Um, but Grace, you know, we are the silica experts. We don't have all these different feedstocks readily available. So I encourage anyone who's curious about its application in other kind of feedstocks to definitely please let us know. And whether the model can be used to help with, you know, regulatory, I think it's an open possibility. I'm not going to say a hard no, but definitely something worth exploring.
All right. And the next question is there an optimum max ppm level to use the adsorbent and obtain constantly 3 ppm at the outlet?
Natalia, do you want to tackle that one, or you want me to go for it?
No, I can. Well, it depends on incoming impurities. So we can model it based on incoming impurities. We can predict what level of adsorbent will be needed to get constantly to below 3 ppm or whatever spec is level, but it depends on the incoming impurities.
Yeah, and whether there's a max incoming or not, I mean, I think it's really just dependent on what feedstock you're curious about or what your blend ratio is. One thing we see is that, you know, trisil is always more efficient than traditional bleaching earth adsorbents. But if we compare
It's special at higher levels of impurities. It's more efficient.
But even like when we in the lab, Natalia, even when we sometimes like test tricycle adsorption capacity
Mhm.
in like DCO versus soybean oil
Mhm.
versus animal fat, sometimes we get different capacity. So I
Correct.
think the feedstock matrix, the feedstock background plays a important role. So I think it just goes to show like how well you need to know, which is a double-edged sword, right? Sometimes you don't want to know what's in there, chicken beaks or bones or whatever. But it's really important to know what you're working with and have those feedstock um, categorized and analyzed before. We've seen feedstocks come in the 300 ppm range. It's just a matter of getting the right dosage to get those uh, licensor specification levels. But I would say most of it is feedstock dependent.
Right.
All right. The next question is, what is the average cost delta between pretreatment process for renewable diesel versus SAF?
Yeah, so I would say, from the pretreatment side, it's so upstream the isomerization and the cracking unit that the pretreatment itself is the same. Whether you're making renewable diesel or SAF, the pretreatment process is essentially identical. You still have to meet 3 ppm of phosphorus and 7 ppm of metals, or maybe 1 ppm and 5 ppm. It depends, which hydroprocessing technology you use. Whether you make renewable diesel or SAF really comes towards the end of the catalyst process. And by then, pretreatment's over. So essentially they're the same, no matter which one your refinery's tailored to produce at that time.
Okay, the next one, it says, can we blend the feed with high sulfur mineral oil blended with biodiesel?
High sulfur mineral oil with biodiesel?
That is what it says, yes. If James
Huh.
is still on, perhaps he can clarify. We can move on to the next question maybe during that time.
Well, I do know some of our tricycle grades are for the post-treatment of biodiesel, and rather than being hydrogel with 60% moisture, they are on the drier side, and this allows it to really remove any residual glycerin that might be uh, carried over from the transesterification process. But I think, yeah, I'm curious. That one I honestly don't know. It might require a mixture of our, hydrogel tricyl with some of our more, we call
Zero
them
gel.
zero
Dry.
gels, the
Dry.
drier version.
Mhm.
Yeah, it might require a mixture of that if we're going to start including some biodiesel in there. But that's a good question. I'm curious to explore that more.
Awesome. Okay. This next question is long.
Okay.
So here we go. A recent NREL paper about HEFA-SAF mentions that fossil fuel converted plants have a production derate ranging from 25 to 50% while producing renewable diesel or SAF, depending on the feedstocks and the previous technology of the original fossil fuel plant. Could you tell us more about the relationship between a plant's productivity and the feedstock choice? What pretreatment process most impacts the renewable diesel or SAF productivity on average?
Wow, yeah, that is a loaded question. So converting a refinery from, traditional fossil fuel to a renewable, we're cutting the productivity in half. I think again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I think it does come back to the feedstock selection and whether you can successfully pre-treat it or not. Hydrotreating although renewable diesel and SAF are, newer to the industry, hydrotreating has been around for quite some time. So usually these technology providers, they have a good understanding on what contaminants are going to affect their catalyst. Thinking about productivity, what I'm almost wondering, and again, I don't have all the answers, but what I'm almost wondering is maybe perhaps this productivity is hindered so much because the catalyst is deactivating quicker due to not a adequate pretreatment unit. So I'm almost wondering if it's something to do with the catalyst and the need to shut down refineries and the need to do these turnarounds more often. I believe back when our group started looking at this collectively across Grace in, I think it was like the 2010s, we've correlated, what the contaminant levels coming in and how long the catalyst can last. So certainly, even if you go from 3 ppm of phosphorus coming in to 5 or 6, right? When you think ppm, it's such a small change, but in reality, you're doubling the amount that's in there. And if these catalysts that have been around forever, not forever, but you know what I mean, these catalysts that have been around, if we're doubling the contaminants that they're used to seeing, that's going to essentially cut the service life of the catalyst in half. So I'm almost wondering if that's related to why the productivity when switching is so much lower. Just the need to, whether it's a heat exchanger or piping issue and having to clean that out and shut down, or if it's having to change out the catalyst because it's just deactivated so much quicker. I'm wondering if that could be the reason why it's so low. But I think it's a testament to why pretreatment is so important, right? I'm not sure what feed this refinery or what the study showed, but if the feedstock was as low as what we try to target, then I don't see why productivity should be influenced. I do know that our art team is constantly looking at new ways to make their catalyst more prone to phosphorus and metals, and that way, even if extra does come in, that the catalyst still remains, as expected. But 50% is quite a lot, so I think most of it has to do with the pretreatment part.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Long question, long answer.
That's justified.
But it was a good question.
All right. Yes, thank you to our very interactive audience.
Yeah.
The next question is, can the adsorbent be used to improve the degumming with a centrifuge instead of using a filter?
Natalia, you want to take that one?
Well, adsorption process can be used instead of to replace a water wash, but I'm not sure I understand how it replaces a filter.
Yeah, I think with any kind of adsorption process, a filter is going to be needed because these are solid particles.
Right.
I think what the question and I think what it's asking maybe is, can you get rid of the filter and install a centrifuge? With that, I would probably say no.
No.
Maybe
People do have centrifuge, but they still have filter.
Right.
In the
Right. And another good thing about having a filter at the end of the adsorption process is something we call the pressed bleach. We say
effect.
pressed bleach because it comes from edible oil, but really like a pressed filter cake effect. So if you think about a filter that, is just essentially this metal mesh, and then you start adding, you start your process and all of a sudden these solids start building up on it, right?
Right.
Eventually you're going to form a cake, which could be a couple inches, right? And at that point, you really get something more like a chromatography effect
Right.
as well.
Secondary impurity reduction or fine cleaning, purification, what I call it.
Yeah, so you get the adsorption that really happens in the slurry tank,
And
but
then
you also get even further adsorption going through the filter cake on the filter.
yes.
All right, next question is what are the typical yield losses percent associated with RD and SAF pretreatment?
Typical oil losses.
Yield losses.
Yield losses.
Mm-hmm.
Yield losses, yield losses. Well, we usually like to think, or we
Improving the yield.
yeah, if we compare against bleaching earth adsorbents, we're not losing yield. We're gaining it. If I think about having the filtration, and typically by the time you get to the filter, you know, the water is vacuumed out of the process and you're just left with the solid fraction of trisol. So, you know, say you add 1 gram of trisol in there, by the end of it, you're only filtering out 0.4 grams of solids. So by doing that, I'm trying to think. By if we think about the solid fraction, right? And we think about bleaching earth where most of it is a solid. On a solid filter cake comparison, the amount of oil retained is going to be the same. However, with trisol or with synthetic amorphous silica, there's always less filter cake being generated. The filters last longer, so the actual quantity of filter cake is much less. But the percentage of
70%, but the oil loss is the same, about 30%. But you're right. In general, you lose less because there is 70% less solids.
right, yeah.
Because not
So
only you replace 1/3 of the bleaching earth, approximately 30%, but also silica hydrogel has 60% moisture built in. So the solids are only 40%.
yeah, so the fraction of the filter cake waste, the fraction that's oil, should be the same in both cases, but the total quantity,
Right.
the absolute quantity will be much less just because lower dosage, lower solids content. So in general, you keep more oil in your process in comparison.
Okay, next question is to remove fame from glycerin, what separation process would work? Does just water washing do the job or does it need a centrifuge?
Yeah, so I think for fame, we definitely see, you know, water washing not quite getting it down to specification level, especially for first generation biodiesel. That's why there's usually some kind of adsorption cleanup at the end. Whether it needs a centrifuge, I think this is a good question maybe for like the engineering technology providers, whether a centrifuge is needed or not. But like I said, we do have those more drier silica materials that can get the biodiesel in spec after the transesterification process. It'll remove glycerin, any residual FFAs at that point. Yeah.
Okay, so we have a few similar questions that maybe we'll have you guys follow up with on the right person afterward. The next question is, what are some of the biggest challenges a pretreater will face when changing adsorbents?
Let me take that one. Of course, when you change something in your process, you have to go through process optimization. You have to get familiar with material. You need to obtain knowledge of handling, maybe dosing system. You need to rebalance your, filtration perhaps. As you will deal now with much less adsorbent, you may need to pre-coat your filters. So there are some things, but at the same time, they're so similar in a way, they both dry powders. So I don't see a big challenge posted by replacing one adsorbent with another. Usually, all plants that we've been to have no issues with switch, with some modifications and optimization, but very small.
Okay, thanks, Natalia. So which feedstock will work best with your adsorbent?
Okay, Chelsea, I take that one.
Sure. Yeah.
The best feedstocks that will work with silica adsorbent that are ones most likely with higher level of phosphorus and metal contaminants, where trisul provides the most effective purification. And examples, some of them I showed in my presentations, use cooking oil, animal fats, different blends with grease, distilled corn oil, we tested soybean oil, pretty much a variety of feedstocks that have high level of phosphorus and metals.
Okay, the next question is, would Trisul allow you to reduce waste disposal?
Yeah. Yes. So straight to the point, yes. I think, we chatted quite a bit about absorption capacity and how the dosages are so different when we look at triso versus traditional adsorbents. And the difference is significant, really. So there's that, and then there's also the physical composition of the adsorbents, right? Sometimes bleaching earth adsorbents and silica adsorbents, sometimes they're used interchangeable, but really they are completely different, right? If we think about synthetic amorphous silica and having 60% water, where on the other hand, bleaching earth might have 5 or 10% water, how they facilitate absorption can also be different. So putting a reduced dosage together with a reduced solid content of the actual adsorbent, it's almost magnifying the amount of waste that can be reduced. We have this model where, we put a lot of theory and calculations into it, but the real satisfaction comes from seeing that at a trial or at a customer site. That's where we can really be like, oh, wow, our model is valid and not just, spilling numbers out for the heck of it. There's really some meaning behind that. So can trisil reduce waste? Absolutely. I also think about, renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuel. The main goal is to get to a larger state of being sustainable across the globe. So having a process that generates so much waste, if I think of 2.5% of an adsorbent, that's a lot.
It's not sustainable.
Yeah, so having to deal with all that waste, it's maybe not such a great look, right? And there's also a lot of logistics that goes on behind it. So not just a good look, but also a huge headache. And I really think
expense. It's a large expense. It's not cheap to get rid of
yeah.
waste.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, trisil can definitely help mitigate the pre-treatment solid waste fraction. And it's not just the waste, but also the cost to dispose of that waste, and also the fuel emissions to take the waste from the refinery to a landfill. You know, these all these carbon calculations are perhaps going to get to that point, right? So we start thinking about carbon intensity of the fuel you produce. You don't want to be, you know, sending
Using
a lot to the
trucks and
landfill.
trucks. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. This is going to be our final question, and it is, can silica reduce the impact of oil losses experienced when using clay?
Yeah, so I'll take.
Yeah, go ahead, Chelsea.
Now I'll do this last one, Natalia, if you don't mind. So can Trisol reduce oil losses? Again, short answer, absolutely. As I think about our value proposition, and apparently what a lot of people online cared about being productivity, this is where, you know, every ounce, every gallon of fuel that can be produced extra without having the headache to find the right feedstock, you know, any kind of optimization win you can get could lead to substantial impacts for the refinery. Although that 1% of fuel is only one digit in the grand scheme of things, and at the scale these renewable fuel producers are at, that 1% could mean millions of extra dollars in revenue for these companies, and that's just from switching adsorbent technologies. So I think by having an amorphous silica hydrogel like our Trisol product, I think it's definitely more efficient in keeping more feedstock in the process and not sending it to the landfill with the rest of the filter cake waste. So anything that can really go into keeping more feedstock in the refinery, I think is a huge win for these guys, and definitely something Trisol can help out with.
All right, and as a reminder, any questions not asked today will be followed up with by our speakers. Chelsea and Natalia, is there any final thoughts or anything you want to add before we wrap things up today?
I just like to thank, you know, everybody who's stayed with us through this. I see a good amount of people still on the line, so I really hope you guys got something and take it away with you. If there's any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We're very eager to learn more about the industry, you know, get samples, evaluate our materials, brainstorm on next generation products. And yeah, just thank you all again for listening. And I really hope you got something out of this.
All right, well, that will conclude today's webinar. Again, a recording will be available at biodieselmagazine.com under the events tab. On behalf of Biodiesel Magazine, I want to thank W.R. Grace and Chelsea and Natalia for an excellent webinar. And to our attendees, be sure to check out our upcoming events. And thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time.